I'm Mark Golub, and in the news, the visit of Pope Francis to the United States, which has been a major focus of attention on virtually every American media outlet and has seemed to uplift many Americans. Before we talk about the Pope, however, it's wonderful to be with you again as we truly begin the new Jewish year together, 5776. I hope those of you who celebrated the high holidays of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur experienced the most moving and inspiring 10 days of awe, that you're re-energized for the new year, and that the new year will be one of health and joy and fulfillment for each and every one of you. I also want to take a moment to thank all of you who've been in touch with me personally over the holidays with your warm and wonderful wishes for me and my family, and for the many expressions of appreciation for JBS's live television broadcasts of the beautiful high holiday services from Central Synagogue. And we continue with Sukkot services and then Simchat Torah services from Central Synagogue. And we're just thrilled to be able to make it possible for those of you who are unable to attend the synagogue in person to still take part and be a part of the Jewish community celebration of the new year and then the joyous festival of Sukkot. So Lishana Tova to each and every one of you. But one of the things that was happening in our country as the Jewish community concluded the high holidays was this historic first trip by Pope Francis to the United States, which was a cause for much celebration and also raised a few sensitive and important questions. And of course, the dynamic of Jewish-Catholic relations has had a long and sometimes stormy history, but which has taken many historic turns for the better at the end of the 1950s and the beginning of the 1960s, and which ultimately led to Nostra Aetate of Pope Paul VI, who issued that historic document 50 years ago this coming month, October 28th, 1965. And so there's also been a good deal of Jewish attention paid to the visit of Pope Francis. And to give us some Jewish perspective and insight, I'm most pleased to welcome back to JBS the Director of Inter-Religious and Intergroup Relations for the American Jewish Committee, Noam Marans. Noam, thank you so much for joining us once again.
It's my pleasure always.
So, Noam, explain to us, who is Pope Francis to the Jewish community?
In many ways, Francis is unique in papal history from a Jewish perspective. And that is an amazing thing to say when we have John the 23rd, who began the revolutionary transformation, and Paul VI, who promulgated Nostra Aetate, the document that we're celebrating during this 50th anniversary, and John Paul II, who with his dramatic gestures changed the entire tone visually, 27-year tenure, and Benedict, who followed in those footsteps. But what is different about Pope Francis is that he's the first pope ordained as a priest after Nostra Aetate was issued. And he had the ability, because of his origins, to implement that in a real, live, living way with genuine relationships in Buenos Aires, in Argentina, in the seventh largest Jewish community in the world. When a priest rises up in a diocese and then becomes bishop and cardinal and has an opportunity to interact with rabbis and Jews, he begins to get it in his internal understanding of what the relationship is about. And there are many examples of this that I could delineate if we want to drill deeper.
Oh, give me one or two.
The best example is that he is completely unself-conscious in celebration of his Jewish relationships. His embrace of Rabbi Abraham Skorka, the accommodations made to Jewish needs during visits at the Vatican.
Yes, by the way, pause for one moment. The Pope, before he became Pope, actually wrote a book with Rabbi Skorka called On Heaven and Earth, a chronicle of their rabbi-priest conversations. Can you speak at all about that and what it symbolizes, the fact that he and a rabbi wrote this book together?
Well, it speaks for itself, but let me put it in historical perspective. Pope Francis wrote one book before he became Pope.
Yes.
It was co-authored with a rabbi.
Yes.
A record of their years of conversations on a joint television show. Tell that to your great-grandparents and see if they'll believe you.
Yes. Yes.
It speaks volumes about his internalization of the essentialness of Christian-Jewish relations to Christian identity. He has repeated this in so many different ways. When he condemns anti-Semitism as a sin, he says, after all, our Christian roots are in Judaism. How can you be an anti-Semite? This is a new tune that has been so successful that we almost take it for granted, and we shouldn't, because so much has changed after 2 millennia of horror. And a series of popes have been able to transform that together with many other people of goodwill, and he is emblematic of that because he was able to apply it in his rise within the church. So it's not a formalistic kind of relationship.
Yeah, that's very important. I appreciate your pointing it out that way, Noam. Also, Pope Francis visited Israel, did he not?
He did, and he made it one of his first trips. He's the third pope to make a state visit to Israel, following the establishment of diplomatic relations by John Paul II in 1993. When Paul VI went, it was a visit to the Holy Land, not to the state of Israel.
Yes. Now, you were at an event with the Pope here in New York. You and I spoke for a moment off camera that there is significance to you personally, given that the time you were a rabbi for, I think it was 16 years, was it?
I was a congregational rabbi in Ridgewood, New Jersey for 16 years.
Okay, and then you basically came over to the American Jewish Committee, and this was in 2001, only a short time before the tragedy of 9/11. And then you were somewhere today with the Pope. I want you to talk about where you were and what that meant to you personally.
It was a deeply emotional morning. I was privileged to be up close together with members of the AJC delegation at a Witness to Peace, a multi-religious gathering with Pope Francis in Foundation Hall of the 9/11 Memorial Museum, in the presence of the wall that they retained, which was the retaining wall that kept the Hudson River from flooding into Ground Zero. And they built a museum around that wall and other pieces as well. And the coming together of the diversity of New York religious expression under the aegis of Pope Francis, Jews, Christians, Sikh, Hindu, Buddhist, Native American, in that place which was desecrated by the perversion of religion for some cause of terrorism which is inexplicable and inexcusable, and coming together today to almost sanctify the place in that way, which of course had already been made holy by the acts of loving kindness of the first responders who lost their lives and the others who dug through the disaster in order to find remains. And here we are in this place, and a place that's very deeply personal. It's personal to anyone who is from New York, who's been here their whole life, for whom Manhattan is part of the center of their lives. But for me and for many others, it was personal because we knew people.
Yes.
We had 5 personal connections lost on 9/11.
I'm very sorry.
and to be in that place, that's what you're thinking about, how it's a very sad place, but it's a place that renews the spirit because humanity came together and it didn't divide us, it brought us together. One of the great lines of Pope Francis today, he said, for all our differences and disagreements, we can live in a world of peace. And he spoke earlier about the fact that it was meant to divide us, and all it did was bring us closer together.
Mm-hmm. And by the way, let me just press you one moment, Noam. I would imagine just being there and the fact of this gathering, a witness to peace, in and of itself, would have significance to be moving to anybody who was privileged to be there. But I want to know if, in addition, there were moments during whatever happened there that also moved you, and that irrespective of where you were, the fact of this event, which is centered around a pope, and you're a rabbi, and you're representing a Jewish organization, but you're there as a human being who is being united in an umbrella of sanctity, but the sanctity is being created by the head of the Catholic Church. And I want to know, as you experienced it, did anything that the Pope did or said, or any part of the ceremony, did it transcend even the fact of the ceremony, the fact of the event, which already in and of itself was powerful?
I will give you several examples of where I became very emotional, and I suspect others did, but I can only speak for myself.
Okay.
And but I think it touched everyone. First, the visual of rabbi and imam sharing a benediction at the beginning, the cantor chanting a slightly universalized form of the El Malei Rachamim, a prayer for the dead, haunting, powerful. And at the end, which really put me over the edge, but I tend to be an emotional guy, was the Young People's Chorus of New York City singing Let There Be Peace on Earth, and they came in at the end, the young kids. And I don't know if they had a connection to 9/11 first responders, but they were wearing badges of the first responders. And in that, and of course, the most powerful piece is that this is being supervised, moderated, and intoned into by Pope Francis.
Yes. Noam, you've actually met the Pope.
I did on already several occasions. The first Jewish delegation to meet with him, and then later a specific AJC delegation at another time.
I don't know if those moments really are fair, give you an insight into the human being and his personality. But how would you describe him, even in the whatever brief moments you may have had with him? What's he like as a person?
You cannot be in his presence and shake his hands and see him make eye contact and listen intently, notwithstanding the number of people whom he is greeting one after another, and not feel a spiritual presence. We met with him very early in his tenure, and they had not yet adjusted to the new Pope, who does not like the formality of protocol and stand here and go there and do it this way, and he was waving off the handlers. And the veterans said, when he comes in, we should stand. So he comes in through the side door. Nobody sees him. He goes to sit on a modest chair. These symbols inside this ornate monument of religion, which is the Vatican, he has the ability to humanize,
Yes.
to make it more intimate, and to make it spiritual. And frankly, you don't have to be Catholic to appreciate that.
Mm-hmm.
You need to just be a human being who understands what positive contribution religious expression can make to the world.
Mm-hmm. And by the way, Noam, there are people, individuals. Sometimes they're Jews and sometimes they're people of other religious traditions who are infused with something that is unique. And when one is in their presence, one has the feeling they're with something somebody extraordinary. And the Lubavitcher Rebbe was supposed to have that same impact on people, and the stories you've heard of how he was able to influence people and what it was like to be in his presence. It was not the presence of an ordinary human being. And sometimes I say to myself, the position infuses that into a human being. And sometimes I feel the human being had it to begin with, and therefore it was part of the reason they rose to the stature that they did. You have any feeling on this?
Pope Francis is an example of how, in a very quick period of time, he can change the impression of a religious denomination,
Mm-hmm.
of religious leadership. And he just has an instinctual feel that he has brought to bear, where he cuts through everything
Mm-hmm.
and reaches above and beyond all of the mess to the people and to the ears that need to hear.
Yes.
It's his commitment to reaching out to the periphery
Mm-hmm.
that makes people of all religious expressions feel good about what he's doing.
Very nice. All right, Noam, I have to ask you also to comment on the more controversial aspects of his papacy. First of all, we have the Vatican now in some way moving towards validating Palestinian statehood, when many in the Jewish community feel that really belongs in the realm of negotiations, direct negotiations between Israel and the Palestinian people. What's your stand? What insight can you bring on the Vatican's position on moving towards recognizing a Palestinian state before there is, in fact, a Palestinian state?
Well, whether what happened in May was new or a reaffirmation is, of course, involved with some debate. But regardless, the Vatican minimally was advancing their relationship with the Palestinians and essentially rewarding the Palestinian approach of pursuing unilateral statehood in lieu of direct negotiations with Israel. And that is a source of disappointment for Jewish leadership and the State of Israel
Mm-hmm.
with the Vatican and with Pope Francis.
Mm-hmm.
We need to be able to celebrate the papacy of Pope Francis and not lose our ability to criticize.
Mm-hmm.
To criticize among friends, to have the power of the revolution, of the change in the relationship. That means that you're allowed to constructively criticize.
Mm-hmm.
And we did.
You've
And we will.
You've expressed this to the
Well,
Vatican?
AJC and other Jewish organizations, together at times with the statements of, in parallel with statements by the State of Israel, were critical.
What's been the reaction?
The reaction has primarily been that this is not new news,
Mm-hmm.
that the Vatican had previously recognized.
Yes, but was the Vatican ready in any way to take a step back?
There was not evidence at that time, but in fairness, we have to indicate that they did not join the latest Palestinian initiative regarding the flags at the United Nations.
Yes.
The Vatican and the future state of Palestine are the only two observer states at the United Nations. It's an interesting fact.
Mm-hmm.
Those are the only two peoples, country, I don't know what you would call them.
Mm-hmm.
And the Palestinians were lobbying for a flag raising of Palestine during this upcoming General Assembly, and the Vatican did not join them in that.
Okay, bottom line for you, Noam. At the moment, are you disappointed in the Vatican stand, or do you are you in some way comfortable with it?
I am not comfortable with it, but I see it in a wider context of the relationship with Pope Francis, which is multifaceted and variegated.
How do you want American Jews to view it?
I think American Jews need to encourage everyone, both the parties to the conflict, and most especially the outside forces that try to influence the conflict, to do everything with our power to get Palestinians and Israelis back to the negotiating table so that we can move towards a two-state solution, which is the only plausible path to peace between Israelis and Palestinians in our lifetime.
Okay, I understand, although you're not making any suggestion about how American Jews feel about the Vatican at this point.
I think that this is a small but important detail in the wider relationship.
Okay. What about the issue raised about Pope Pius XII, who was the Pope during the Shoah, during the Holocaust? And there are issues about how he is going to be revered in the Catholic Church and whether the Catholic Church is assessing his historical role honestly enough. What's your feeling on this?
So in some ways, this is more sensitive than the previous topic.
Mm-hmm.
Why? Because it's unique to Christian-Jewish relations as opposed to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, where there are 190 countries weighing in on it in different ways. This is a unique challenge to Christian-Jewish relations. And there are some mixed signals. There seems to be a commitment implicit in the Vatican not to advance with the beatification process for Pius XII until the Vatican archives are completely open and historians can make a proper evaluation.
Yes.
So that's on the one hand. And in addition to that, Pope Francis, in that book that we spoke about, before he was Pope, committed to the pursuit of truth in understanding what happened during the Shoah and the opening of the archives so the truth can come out. I believe I'm more or less quoting what he said. We have heard that the last of the archives are going to be open soon. I'd like to see more evidence of that in the near future. We hear that that's a possibility, but until it happens, it's a possibility. Pope Francis has expressed some defensiveness in this regard. Now, it's natural on some level because he's asked the question and he is defensive about the papacy. And he says, no, when the truth comes out, it'll become clear that Pius XII did many positive things. So he has expressed that, which I understand because the Catholic Church is a bit under attack historically for this. But it's important from a perspective of Christian-Jewish relations that judgments be reserved until everything is known. This is the last great chapter of Holocaust historiography.
Yes, yes.
That needs to be addressed. And I think we have the ability to do it. Let the truth come out. The relationship can handle it.
Very well said, Noam. So give us an overview as we sort of wind up together. What's the state now of anti-Semitism, not in the Vatican, but from your perspective, in the Catholic pew? To what extent has the relationship now really turned a corner, not only at the highest levels, but the extent to which you feel within the grassroots Catholic community? And to what extent is Pope Francis really making sure or facilitating the embrace of the individual Catholic with the Jewish community?
First, we have to stipulate that the revolution has happened, and that what was part of Christian teaching is no longer taught. The deicide charge, the Jew as Christ killer, the Jew as accursed for not embracing Jesus as Messiah, the association of the covenant with the Jewish people as being usurped. It's now seen as an eternal covenant. The criticism, the decrying, the condemning of anti-Semitism. And Nostra Aetate was followed by many implementations, practical implementations in the education of Christian clergy and how to preach about Jews and Judaism and how to tell the story of the Passion. So the change has been revolutionary. That said, there are 1.2 billion Catholics in the world. Most of them do not live in places where they regularly meet Jews. The United States is indeed unique in that regard. Nostra Aetate is not as accentuated as it is in the United States, in other places. And now that there are so many places in this post-Nostra Aetate era where Christians live and they don't have an opportunity to interact regularly with Jews, it's vitally important that this be part of the educational process for all Catholic leadership throughout the world. Pope Francis has an ability to do this like no other pope, because he's, in addition to being the first post-Nostra Aetate pope, of course, he's the first Southern Hemisphere pope, the first Jesuit pope. His Spanish-speaking ability has the power to reach areas of great Catholic growth in the world. So there's more work to do, and there's a definite difference in the pew. Does that mean that the job is complete? No. I think this is going to be multi-generational, and we are confident that it continues to move in a positive direction.
Noam, I always love talking to you, and you're one of the sweetest people in Jewish leadership. I thank you for the time you've given us, and also it's wonderful to be able to talk to you about an issue this sensitive, and you bring not only a personal insight, but you bring personal, you've been there, and you give us a sense of the tone, and it's very important and very kind. I wish you Shana Tova Mituka. Have a sweet, healthy, and good year, and I hope it's one we get a chance to see each other very often.
Shana Tova to you and to all of your loyal viewers and listeners.
Absolutely. Thank you, Noam.
Take care.
Be well. Rabbi Noam Marans, Director of Inter-Religious Intergroup Relations for the American Jewish Committee. My thanks, as always, to our Director, Sloan Copeland, Serge Goldberg, Production Coordinator, Dara Golub, JBS's Associate Director, and the producers of this edition of In the News, Kara Lilienthal and Jan Weiss. Until the next time, I'm Mark Golub. Be well, my friends.